There we go. So we are recording. Thank you everybody for joining us this morning. Thank you so much to Vizoa, to Wendy for inviting me to have this session with you guys, and for the good work that Vizoa does. These different associations that are focused on education among strata owners are so important. So the purpose of today's education session is we're going to talk about borrowing funds for a major strata project. And I'm going to pause here and just say that borrowing funds, when we're talking about that, that's what we're going to elaborate on today. But really at the heart of this conversation is your strata project. I'm assuming most of you are here because you have some type of upcoming repair and maintenance cycle that you need to deal with. And so borrowing funds is a tool to accomplish that. So at the heart of this conversation is moving forward with your project. So in terms of a little bit of background, CWB Maxium is a division of Canadian Western Bank, and we've been financing strata and condo projects across Canada for over 20 years. It's still fairly, it's not as well known, not as well used in BC compared to some other provinces where the programs are a little more mature. But I'll pause here also for a minute to say that, you know, the purpose of today is to be an education session. I'm not going to be talking specifically necessarily about my product, the Canadian Western Bank product. My objective for today is for you guys to leave this meeting with a better understanding of what strata financing is. So the conversation won't be so much focused on my exact product, but rather the education, the different parts of the Property Act, and how this can be a tool for you. And again, my name is Kelly. I'm the program director for strata financing across Western Canada. So specifically, I live in Vancouver and I look after BC and Alberta. So here we go. We're going to start talking about some of these important parts of your building. This is just a general image. Some of you might be in a townhouse style complex. Some of you might be in an apartment style complex. There's many other common property elements that that are covered under the Property Act, of the responsibility of the corporation. And so again, you're going to hear me say this over and over again today. The purpose of today's meeting is to think about what do you have coming up in your capital repair cycle. These are some of the common elements that you would be responsible for repairing and maintaining throughout the life cycle of your strata complex. So some of the big ones include building envelopes, windows, roofs, but there's also, your underground parkade, your fencing, all of the things that are beneath your walls. So these are all considered common property, and these are the responsibility of the strata corporation to repair and maintain. When we're looking at funding a major project, there's different ways for you guys as a corporation to accomplish this. So in an ideal world, you guys will have accrued enough funds in your reserve account, and you can pass your vote to use your reserve funds to do your roofing project or your window project. But the statistics range on this. If you're underfunded, we call it underfunded when you don't have enough in your reserve. And the statistics are that virtually every strata corporation in BC is underfunded, meaning there's not enough money in the reserve account for the upcoming special projects. Even the most well-intended strata who's been diligently saving will find themselves short right now, mainly due to inflation. So when there is a shortage in your reserve funds, usually what strata looks to do is pass a special levy. And so for those of you who've already been through that, you know what that is. For those of you who it's an unfamiliar term, that special levy is a one-time cash call from the owners. So there's a resolution that's put on the floor that says, we have a window project that we want to do, and it's going to cost us $500,000. We're going to pass a special levy, and the owners are all going to be responsible for paying their share of the special levy to pay for the reserve project. And the special levy is always broken out by your schedule of unit entitlement, similar to how your strata fees are identified. And that's a great way to pay for projects. In the event that you have a shortage in your reserve, it's very typical to look at passing a special levy in order to self-fund the project to get the work done. A loan or financing is another alternative or a complement to this. So you might find yourself in a situation where a special levy is just simply not attractive to the ownership. And so then you can look at borrowing the funds and repaying it over time. And you'll see at the center of this is the project. And so again, the heart of this conversation today is figuring out what work needs to get done and how can you move that project forward. The vast majority of BC real estate was constructed in the 80s and 90s, thanks to the post-expo building boom. And so these components are just aging out. They reach the end of their naturally expected useful life. So they've served us well. the building has used them up, the owners have used them up and drawn down the useful life of these components, and they're just reaching the end of when they're going to be serviceable. So it's time to start looking at these schedules of replacements. Typically, that's outlined for you in your depreciation report. If you don't have a depreciation report, I encourage you to get it updated or obtain one, get quotes for obtaining one. A depreciation report is a financial planning tool. It's not an engineering document. The person that comes to complete the report, they're not going to do what's called destructive testing. They're not going to start pulling things apart to see what the condition of your building is like. But a depreciation report is completed by someone who surveys the building, identifies how old components are. They do a visual inspection, and then they create a depreciation report, which is a financial planning tool. It's a way for the corporation to have an idea of when some of their major components are going to age out and need to be replaced. It's not a crystal ball. We don't know exactly when a roof is going to fail, or when the windows are going to need replacing, or when it's going to be time. But the depreciation report will at least give you an idea of when the expected useful life is going to be done with your components, and when it's time to start thinking about those projects. So again, that's the heart of the conversation today. What's the schedule of repair and maintenance that needs to be happening at these multi-million-dollar businesses? Which is what I refer to your corporation. It is a multi-million-dollar business. And if you're an owner, if you've bought in, you're a shareholder in that multi-million-dollar business. And so when we're talking about these common elements, which I'm just going to go back to, your common property, we're not talking about your unit. Your unit under the Property Act is considered the midway point of the wall in. So you have all the control in the world over what's inside your unit to a certain degree within the bylaws and the Act. What we're talking about today is the common property. So think about it as the midway point of your wall out. So all of these external things. And while you may think I'm not on the top floor, the roof isn't my responsibility. In fact, when you're buying into a strata plan, you're buying into being what I refer to as a shareholder in this large multi-million-dollar corporation. So when we're thinking about these projects and planning ahead, you have to shift your mindset. I encourage you to shift your mindset and think about this as from a shareholder perspective, less about what's happening within my specific unit. What's my responsibility to my corporation that I've bought into as a shareholder? So what exactly is a strata loan, and what does it mean for the corporation? So under the Strata Property Act, Section 111 gives the owners, there's two things. You've got your strata corporation, which is the going concern. It's your business entity that enters into contracts. So maybe it has a membership with Vizoa. It's got a contract with a strata management company. It maybe has contracts for other goods and services. And then there's the owners, which is a different entity. The owners ebb and flow, as we know, throughout time, depending on who's living and owning, who owns in the strata corporation at any given time. So Section 111 says that yes, the strata corporation can be authorized by the owners, by a vote of the owners, to borrow funds for the purposes of a remediation project. The Strata Property Act goes on further to say that you can't mortgage any common property or leverage anyone's individual units. So that's what we refer to when we say it's an unsecured commercial loan to the strata corporation. Unsecured meaning, to be abundantly clear, there is no mortgage placed on common property. There's no mortgage placed on anyone's individual units. From the lender's perspective, we think of it as a cash flow loan. We don't have that traditional tangible security. If you compare this product with, say, a personal mortgage, if I do have a personal mortgage, and so my mortgage is secured against, the bank owns my unit, owns my strata lot until every last dollar is paid in full. I have to do proof of income. I complete all the paperwork. So we all know, you guys are owners. You've been through that mortgage process. It's an inherently very, very secure product. If you compare that with this product, we're talking about an unsecured commercial loan. So the borrower is the strata corporation. The strata corporation is the entity that holds the loan. It's an agreement between the lender and the actual corporation itself. So that's what we refer to with it being a business loan held by the corporation. It's approved by a 3/4 vote at an SGM or AGM, and it has to be approved by the owners by that 3/4 vote. So what does it mean for the owners? Well, Strata is the borrower. So if Strata is the borrower, then that means that there's no mortgage or security registered on any individual units. I don't have to complete a personal application. The debt is not registered on my credit bureau. And essentially, it goes back to that same concept of the corporation, the business entity is borrowing the money, and then it's repaid monthly by the owners. So from the owner's perspective, I'm authorizing my corporation to enter into this loan. I have a responsibility for that loan by way of my share of unit entitlement. And then so my monthly repayment coincides with my share of the unit entitlement of the payment. In terms of the structure of these loans, we've already talked a little bit about the security, so unsecured. From our perspective, the main security is the future cash flow from the owners. So if we're lending money to the corporation, we're very careful that we do our due diligence up front, and then we're going to lend you guys money to do your windows, do your roof, whatever your project is, and then the money is going to be repaid over time through owner fees as one way to do it. So that's ultimately what our security is that, that future income from the owners to the Strata Corporation. The most common structure is 5-year renewing terms. So it could be a straight 5-year term and then it's paid off in full. For a longer lifespan project, we can look at extended amortizations, so up to 25 years. One of the cornerstones of Strata financing is that a lender should never, we don't want to ever put a corporation in a situation where they're still paying for the project when they have to do it again. So for example, if you're looking at financing a fencing project and it's going to last you for 10 years, well, then we probably want the financing to be paid off in full within 7 or 8 years. So there's a little bit of window before you have to replace that common property again. And not all lenders can do these extended amortizations. Some do, some don't. Some prefer to have everything repaid in full. These are just within the market, some options. So for us, from our perspective, if you're looking at doing something like a building envelope project that's going to have a very long lifespan, these fiber cement paneling and hardy planking, they can last far beyond 25 years. So we're comfortable doing an extended amortization. It's not always the right fit. Part of what the lender should be doing with you guys is listening, understanding what the project is, and then helping the corporation find out what's the right structure, what's the right repayment length. I would say the most common would be a 5-year term and then say a 10-year amortization. Just like any other type of debt, you don't want to extend the amortization any longer than necessary, but you don't want to tighten it up so much that the owners can't keep up with that monthly payment or that cash flow. So that's something that's very nuanced, and we have to be having that conversation between lender and Strata about what the right fit is. The rates on these deals are a little bit different from what you would be thinking about with respect to comparing it to a personal mortgage, for example. And you might be starting to connect some of the dots with going over here to the security concept that we talked about. So the reason that a personal mortgage rate is the cheapest money that you can get is because of all that security that the bank has. There's a little bit of a premium on these rates. I'm not going to talk specific about rates because, again, we're not talking about my program. Lenders, there shouldn't be a huge difference between the rates in the market. So it's safe to say that there's usually a little bit of I call it a premium on the rate. So as of today, the Bank of Canada put the prime rate up this week to 6.45. So usually 5-year fixed mortgages are going to be somewhere in and around the prime rate, give or take. And then these deals are going to be a little bit above that. So it's not twice as high. There's going to be a little bit of a lift on it, a little bit of a higher rate. It's not going to be as low as a mortgage rate. It's going to be a little bit higher. So that's one of the things to bear in mind going into this. The rate is going to be a little bit higher than if the owners, say, refinance their mortgage or did a home equity line of credit. So those are kind of some of the different components that go into these loan structures. Most lenders will have some type of prepayment privilege. So for example, on the anniversary of the loan, you can pay down up to 10% each year. So if you have an operating surplus, you can vote at your AGM to apply that to the loan balance to start to pay down the loan. If you have a term and an amortization that exceeds the term, so a 5-year term and a 10-year amortization, at the end of the 5-year term, the corporation has lots of flexibility. They can pay it off, pay it down, or refinance would be a typical way to structure those. So the understanding the relationships is again, the central most important part of understanding how the Strata financing works. So just like the project is at the heart of this conversation, the Strata Corporation is the most important entity that enters into this relationship. So you have the owners, who are the only ones that can authorize the corporation by way of a 3/4 vote to enter into this contract, enter into this agreement. So then the corporation, the owners pass the vote and say, yes, we want the corporation to spend up to $500,000 on a window project, and we agree to repay it through these means. And then the corporation can then enter into the contract with us as the lender. So there's standard borrowing paperwork that council is authorized to sign on behalf of the corporation. Council, I often get this question, so I'll pause here to note, if you're a council member and you are authorized in the resolution to sign the paperwork, you are not personally responsible just because you're the one who's authorized to sign the paperwork. You're signing on behalf of the corporation. Sometimes that's a concern that comes up. And then the corporation is also authorized in that resolution to enter into contracts with the contractor. So they can go ahead and obtain bids and pursue finding the right contract that's going to suit the corporation for that project. And so the corporation is at the heart of all this. The owners are saying, yes, absolutely, go ahead and enter into the contracts for the work as well as how to pay for it. The corporation is what's responsible, holds the loan between lender and corporation. And then the corporation is also the entity that holds the contracts between the actual contractor, general contractor who's going to do the work. So the Strata Corporation is at the heart of all this. For you guys, when is a good time to consider this financing? So it's ultimately an alternative to a special levy or an alternative to paying upfront. Keeping in mind, finding a way to move that project forward is the most important part. It's an alternative to a special levy. So I see this commonly when owners have what I've started to call special levy fatigue. So if I'm an owner and we've had a whole bunch of projects that have come up year after year, and we're doing the right things and we're passing special levies to fund these projects, there's going to reach a time where if you've done that 3-4 years in a row, the owners are saying, look, we're doing great work repairing and maintaining our property, but I can't do another special levy. It's been, $5,000 to $10,000 for the last few years, and the place looks great. And I understand we have more to do, but it's just not an option to continue to do this. And so financing it is an alternative to that. So you can say, okay, instead of doing a special levy, let's borrow the money and repay it over 5 years. I'm doing a lot of top-up financing right now, and that's because projects due to inflation are coming in over budget. So maybe you're already in the middle of a building envelope project and you're finding that you're going to be over budget by 10 to 20%, which is happening across the board right now. So then instead of going back to the owners for another cash call, another special levy, the owners can pass a 3/4 vote to say, yes, we can borrow an additional $300,000 for the purposes of continuing on with our building envelope project that is already underway. Bridge financing is something that is, I think I'm going to start seeing more of it over the next little while. So bridge financing would be for a much larger project, like a building envelope project. Typically, building envelope projects, in my opinion, are best done through special levies. But a special levy typically relies on the owners being able to come up with their own share of the cash, which often involves refinancing their personal mortgage or doing a home equity line of credit. And those two things rely on the owners having enough equity in order to do that. And because of what we're seeing right now is the market softening a little bit, I think there's going to be a point where it might be attractive for a corporation to temporarily fund a large project. And then once the work is done and you can have a higher appraisal value on the other side of your project, then owners can do a special levy to pay off their share. So bridge financing would be just considered like a temporary funding of a project throughout the construction window. And then on the other side of it, you pass your special levy, and then everybody pays off their share of the project, including the construction interest on the other side of the project once the building is rehabilitated. There's usually a large group of owners, a handful of owners who on the other side of the project want to sell. They want to wait until the building has the new cladding, the new windows, the new balconies. And then once that's done, then they would like to sell ideally at a higher rate. So this bridge financing can be a solution for some of those bigger ticket projects in that sense. I would say a more common use of financing is when, say, last year we did the envelope and it was very expensive and everybody came up with their share, maybe my share. I own Strata Lot 1 and I had to pay $50,000 for my share of the building envelope project. And then now this year, unfortunately, the elevator goes and we need modernizing. I know that we need to do the elevator, but I can't do another $5,000 after doing 50 last year. So that would be a more traditional use of financing. Instead of financing the $50,000 project, which most people would rather just do a home equity line of credit or refinance their mortgage, we wait, and then maybe we need to borrow money for financing or a further set of projects. So those are some typical ways to look at it. I mean, ultimately, what we're trying to do is protect your investment. So if you own and live in a strata complex, it probably is your primary residence, which is often your most valuable and emotional asset. And we need to protect that investment. And there's also that reminder that under the Property Act, Section 72 has that very clear duty to repair and maintain common property. So sticking our heads in the sand and wishing and hoping that the project is going to go away or not be as pervasive as we think that it might be, it's just unfortunately not an option. Not doing work is only kicking the ball down the field, and it's going to make it more expensive to do it down the road. And in the meantime, when the owners are voting down the project, the building, whatever needs to get done, it's getting worse. It's going to get harder and harder to repair whatever project needs to get done, and costs are just going up. And so that's where under Section 72, understanding that duty to repair and maintain common property is really important. This has been tested over and over again in the court system. It's also been tested over and over again in the CRT. And almost without fail, if the owner can prove that the work needs to get done. So often there's an engineering report that indicates this needs to happen, or some type of stamped report from a professional that says this project needs to happen. The courts and the CRT are going to side with the corporation and say, you guys need to do the work. So just keep all that in mind. If you're finding that a special levy is getting voted down or it's not the right fit for owners, there are other ways. We can look at doing financing. Borrow the money, repay it over time, get the work done. And it's taking that idea to, is a monthly payment a better fit? So these are some other ways that can help you kind of wrap your head around where financing can be a good fit. So inflation, it's in the news, it's all everything, we're all talking about right now. The rate of inflation especially with anything to do with construction, is even more pervasive. It's really, really high right now. Bids are coming back on projects 10, 20, 30% higher than anybody expected. So, is it a better option to finance the project and get it done so you can sign your contracts in today's dollars rather than waiting until next year and swimming upstream against inflation? Nobody has a crystal ball. We don't know what things are going to look like through 23, 24, 25. But what we do know historically over time is that it's just going to get more expensive to do this work. So consider whether borrowing the money and paying interest is going to be more financially efficient for you than trying to swim upstream against inflation. I've also seen some corporations be very, very smart and efficient with grouping projects. So I had a corporation that I was working with very recently. They just passed their vote last week, and they had done really good work for 5 years, doing special levies and using their reserve funds to get done a whole bunch of projects that they needed to get done. And they found themselves in a situation where they were out of reserve funds and they'd done several special levies. So the owners had that levy fatigue. And they had 4 different projects that they knew they needed to get done. They were unrelated. The projects were not all part of one same system. And they said, look, let's borrow $800,000 from Maxium, and let's get these 4 projects done in the fall of 2022 and into 2023. And it's going to be more efficient for us to borrow that money and repay it over time than spread these 4 projects out over the next 4 years. And so that was a really cool way that they were able to use their money efficiently. In that particular case, they also found that because they had done basically everything other than these last 4 projects around their property, there wasn't a big need for anything in their reserve for the next 10 years after they did this. So they were able to use their reserve fund contribution towards the loan payment. So the message from council to the owners was, we can borrow the money to do these 4 projects. We're going to pay it back over time. And because we don't have anything else coming in to save for in our reserve, we're going to get to a baseline and make sure that we have our safety net in our reserve account. And then we're going to use our reserve fund contribution that we pay monthly with our strata fees towards the loan payment. So they were able to do this and only increase everybody's fees very, very nominally, because they were able to use or monetize their reserve fund contribution. That's not always an option. We don't, that expression, we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. You should not be redirecting your reserve fund money unless that makes sense from a financial planning perspective. You're meant to be putting into your reserve to save for your next series of repairs. But in this case, they had just updated their depreciation report, and it was very clear that in 2023, there was just this group of 4 projects. And once that was done, there was nothing else in the horizon for 10 years. So we said, okay, let's use that reserve fund contribution for 5 years. They were still putting a little bit in as well. And then that gave them 5 years on the other side of the loan to start aggressively putting back into their reserve fund for the next project that wasn't scheduled until 10 years from now. So there's some ways to get creative with this. So that's what I'll talk about with the grouping projects. And then single phasing is another thing for you to think about when you're talking to the professional that's helping you put your project together. They often will give you options about, is it more efficient to break this out and do multiple phases? Or is it going to be more financially efficient to rip the Band-Aid off and get the whole thing done in one fell swoop? I see this often with windows and roofing, especially, for example, with a townhouse complex and a roofing project. Sometimes the idea that owners have is, well, why don't we do the roofing project, phase it over 5 years and pay for it slowly that way? That's always an option that's available to you, but I would encourage you to actually think about what that looks like. So that means that every year you're going to have to pass a special levy. And as time goes on, people are going to have their roofs done, and then you're still going to have to rely on the goodwill of owners, which I've seen this go very wrong, to say, okay, well, my roof is done, so I don't want to pass a special levy for the remaining townhouse complexes. And it can be very, very acrimonious. There's also that fairness concept. Well, so then that means there's going to be several years difference between when one group of townhouses has a new roof and the others don't. And that affects marketability. There might be some water ingress issues. And then, as we know, as time goes on, things get more expensive and the damage gets worse. So while sometimes phasing is a good option, I would encourage you to really think about how long that phasing is going to take and what does that mean from a fairness perspective and a financial efficiency perspective. And is perhaps financing the project, just borrowing the money up front and getting it all done in a single phase. Usually the larger the scope of work, the more general contractors sharpen their pencil and come in more aggressively on their bids as well. So you can get some efficiency there. Then you're also only paying for permitting and site works once. And if you need to have an engineer, you're paying the engineer to oversee the one large project instead of all these small projects. You're not paying for scaffolding and porta potties and clearing out laydown areas. You're just doing that once instead of having to do that year over year. And then there's also that quiet enjoyment of your home that you all deserve. For most of you, you're owners, you live in these units, these townhouses or these apartment buildings, and you deserve quiet enjoyment of your home. So what's it going to look like if you have, someone there doing work year after year after year? So those are just some things to think about if you're debating single phasing or multi-year phasing of a project. So that's everything that I was going to chat about today. Keeping an eye on the clock here. We don't want to keep you too long. I encourage you to take down my information if there's anything that you want to reach out and talk to me about with a specific project. I'm here, I'm an employee of the bank, so it's my job to be of service to you guys. You're welcome to reach out at any point in time, call me or email me if you have a specific project that you want to talk about. So thank you for attending today's webinar. For those of you who are council members, I also want to give one final thank you so much on behalf of the owners who never say thank you and appreciate all the volunteer work that gets into being a council member. Thank you for doing the work that you do volunteering. And a big thank you to Vizoa. These education and advocacy groups are so important, and the work you guys do is so important, and we're lucky to have you.